The Crucible never slept. It was a wound in the fabric of space, a singular, colossal star system cauterized by the shimmering, impassable energy field of the Veil. Within its confines, a menagerie of alien species, the Kindred, orbited the guttering red giant at its heart, a dying sun named Sol Anku. They had been trapped together for millennia, a cosmic prison teeming with ancient grudges and fragile alliances, and humanity was the latest inmate. We'd arrived centuries ago, ragged refugees from a dead Earth, limping through the Veil in generation ships that were more prayer than propulsion. The Kindred had allowed us to exist, but not to live. We were relegated to the system's forgotten corners, the debris fields and hollowed-out asteroids of the outer belt, a place the others called the Rust. We were scavengers, mechanics, and ghosts, haunting the fringes of a civilization that saw us as little more than clever vermin. I was born in that rust, a void forged, cradled in the zero-G of a mining refinery and weaned on recycled air and resentment. My name is Kalen, and I remembered a day when the silence of the void wasn't the loudest thing in my head. That was before the Lumina came to Habitat G7. The Lumina, an ancient species of seemingly benevolent energy beings, were the self-appointed shepherds of the Crucible, the enforcers of a rigid peace they called the Concordance. They were beautiful, terrible things, crystalline ships that moved without sound, and beings of pure light that spoke in condescending chimes. They claimed to maintain balance, but their balance was a foot on the throat of anyone who grew too fast, too loud, too human. My family, my home, were deemed a destabilizing element during a compliance purge. They didn't use weapons of fire and thunder. They used resonance frequencies, harmonics that simply unmade the bonds holding our habitat together. I watched from the cockpit of my scrapper, the Gnat, helpless on a mandatory away haul, as my world was silenced, its lights winking out one by one into the uncaring black. The memory of that silent, crystalline violence became the engine of my soul, a cold fusion of grief and hatred that burned where my heart used to be. My life became a simple, grinding routine pilot, the Gnat. My heavily modified mining vessel, through the belt, tear valuable isotopes from derelict asteroids, and trade them for just enough fuel and nutrient paste to do it all again. The Gnat was my only real home, a cramped, chaotic space smelling of ozone and stale coffee, its every surface a testament to scavenged tech and desperate ingenuity. It was an extension of my will, a jagged piece of my own brokenness given wings. The breaking point for all of us came disguised as a proclamation of safety. The Lumina, in their infinite wisdom, declared a new edict. All human scrapper vessels were to be fitted with Kindred-controlled neural limiters. They claimed it was to prevent industrial accidents and ensure system stability. We knew what it was. It was a leash. It was a death sentence delivered with a gentle chime, strangling the only industry that gave us a sliver of autonomy. Protests on the larger hubs were met with the Lumina's usual efficiency. Dissident leaders vanished. Gatherings were dispersed by sonic pulses that left people bleeding from their ears. Hope, already a scarce commodity in the Rust, began to sublimate into a fine, explosive dust of pure rage. It was this rage that drove me to the graveyard, a forbidden sector, a vast field of derelict ships from a war so ancient, none of the current kindred even admitted to fighting it. The graveyard was rumored to hold technology far beyond our own. It was also saturated with strange radiation that drove ship sensors and organic minds insane. but desperation is its own kind of compass. I needed a score big enough to buy my way out of the limiter, to vanish into the deep, unmonitored parts of the belt. I pushed the gnat through the shimmering warning beacons, the void around me filling with the skeletal remains of ships the size of mountains. They were wrong. These colossal wrecks, their geometries defying the efficient designs of the kindred. They were all angles and aggression, even in death. It was there, deep within the metallic tomb, that the universe began to sing to me. It started as a flicker in my peripherals, a ghost in the machine, the gnat's old reactor, a temperamental beast I knew better than my own heart, began to hum a new tune. Power output surged, stabilizing at levels that should have melted its core. The comms panel, usually a waterfall of static, went dead silent, except for a low rhythmic pulse that wasn't a signal. It was a feeling. It was a resonance that vibrated in the fillings of my teeth and seemed to latch onto the cold, hard knot of hatred in my gut, making it thrum like a tuning fork. This was the echo in the static. It wasn't a broadcast. It was an invitation. I followed it. The feeling grew stronger, pulling me deeper into the graveyard's heart. It felt ancient, hungry, and deeply, terribly familiar. It felt like the rage I had nursed in silence for years, now mirrored back at me from the void itself. It led me to a ship unlike the others. It wasn't just old, it felt primordial. Its hull was a seamless, obsidian material that seemed to drink the light of the distant soul Anku. No doors, no viewports, just a single gaping wound in its side where another vessel must have struck it eons ago. I docked the gnat, suited up, and went inside. The air was dead, but the silence was alive. It was the silence of a cathedral, heavy and expectant. There were no bodies, no signs of a crew, just winding corridors that seemed to absorb the beam of my helmet lamp. At the ship's core, I found it. It was a chamber, and floating in its center was a crystalline lattice, impossibly complex, that pulsed with a faint, internal light. This was the source of the echo, the heart of the song. As I drifted closer, the resonance flooded my mind. It wasn't a voice. It didn't speak in words. It communicated in pure, undiluted concepts, raw and primal ideograms of feeling. Will. The universe is chaos. Bend it. Defiance. To exist is to resist. Hunger. That which does not consume is consumed. And then, a final, terrible command that felt like an absolution. Become. My mind recoiled, but the fury in my soul leaned in, answering the call. The crystal flared, and a wave of something that wasn't energy and wasn't light washed over me. It passed through my suit, through my skin, and into the very code of my being. Out in the gnat. Every system simultaneously flatlined and rebooted. When I stumbled back into my cockpit, the ship was different. The low hum of the reactor was deeper, more predatory. The diagnostic text scrolling on my main screen was no longer our standard Terran dialect, but a flowing, logical script of perfect efficiency that I had never seen before, yet understood implicitly. The ship felt awake. I fled the graveyard, my mind reeling. The echo, a permanent, quiet hum at the base of my skull. I told no one, tried to pretend it was a hallucination, a symptom of radiation poisoning from the graveyard, but I knew better. The gnat was no longer just a machine. It was a vessel, and I was its pilot. But something else was its heart. I returned to the rust to find it on fire, figuratively for now. Lumina Enforcer ships, elegant, deadly constructs of light and force, were making their rounds, systematically disabling any scrapper that hadn't complied with the limiter edict. They didn't destroy them, they simply fired a precise energy beam that fused the ship's drive to its chassis, leaving it a dead hulk. It was a slow, quiet genocide, and it was happening right in front of us. I saw them corner the stray dog, a rust bucket piloted by an old void-forged named Wren, a man who'd once shared his oxygen reserves with me when my life support failed. The sleek, luminous ship circled his powerless vessel like a shark, its energy weapon charging for the killing blow. I don't remember making a choice. I just acted. The rage inside me. The memory of G7, the echo in my head, it all coalesced into a single, sharp point of intent. I pushed the gnat forward. Wren's voice crackled over the comm. "Kalen, get out of here. It's over." But it wasn't. The Lumina Enforcer turned its attention to me, its chimes shifting from a tone of authority to one of annoyance. It fired a warning shot, a bolt of energy that should have slagged my port engine, but something new happened. A flicker. For a microsecond, the space around the gnat seemed to warp, to bend, and the energy bolt dissipated into nothingness. The Lumina ship paused, its movements losing their fluid grace for the first time. It didn't understand what it had just seen. I didn't either, but the echo did. It surged from the reactor, through the ship, and into me. My hands flew across the controls, but I wasn't entirely in command. The gnat's mining lasers, designed to score asteroids, fired. The beams that emerged were not the diffused cutting tools I knew. They were coherent lances of pure, destructive energy, white-hot and impossibly focused. They struck the Enforcer's shields, and the shields shattered like spun glass. The Lumina vessel, stunned, tried to maneuver, but the gnat was already moving. My engines, once sluggish and patched together, burned with a fierce blue light, pushing the ship through maneuvers that should have torn its frame apart. We danced around the Enforcer, a gnat harrying a hawk. And then the echo showed me its greatest gift. A new system appeared on my console, a schematic that looked like a gravity well folded in on itself. Instinctively, I activated it. There was no sound, no explosion, just a sudden, violent distortion in the space around the Lumina ship. It buckled, its elegant form twisting as if squeezed by an invisible hand. The light of its hull warped, stretched, and then, with a silent, final implosion, the ship was simply gone, crushed into a point of nothingness, silence. A profound, ringing silence fell over the comm channels. Dozens of scrappers in the area had seen it. A souped-up mining vessel, a ship literally named the Gnat, had just single-handedly obliterated one of the Lumina's invincible enforcers. The first crack in the Concordance. The first time in centuries a human had not just resisted, but won. I sat in my cockpit, my breath ragged, my knuckles white on the controls. The echo was quiet now, sated, a low thrum of satisfaction in my mind. The destruction sent a shockwave of disbelief and dawning, terrifying hope through every human settlement in the rust. But it also sent a clear message to our shepherds. The Lumina, their perfect peace shattered by a single act of impossible violence, would not be merciful, they would not be understanding. They would respond with the full, silent, overwhelming force of their righteousness. I looked at the spot where the Enforcer had been. Now, just empty space. I was no longer just Kalen, scavenger and survivor. I was a symbol. I was a weapon. I looked down at my comm screen, at the field of hissing static. For a moment, just a moment, I saw the particles align, swirling into the pattern of a vast, unblinking eye. The echo in the static was awake. It had found its voice in our fury, and it was ready to scream. The silence that followed the Enforcer's death was heavier than any asteroid. It was a vacuum filled with the sudden, terrifying gravity of consequence. On my screen, dozens of ship icons, once scattered and anonymous, now turned toward me, their tracking signals painting a silent constellation of awe and fear. Ren's voice, when it finally returned, was a choked whisper. "Kalen, what have you done?" I didn't have an answer. The echo in my head was a low, purring thrum, a predator digesting its meal. I had just rung the dinner bell, and I had a sickening feeling that both sides of this new war were starving. News of the Enforcer's destruction spread through the rust not like a wildfire, but like a virus. It was a whispered rumor on encrypted channels. A garbled data burst passed from one mining clan to another. A piece of ghost cam footage played in the darkened common rooms of 1,000 habitats. It was a cancer of hope, and it was malignant. The Lumina's response was not what we expected. There was no fleet, no immediate, overwhelming retaliation. Their reaction was far more insidious, far more them. They began to sing. They called it the Song of Concordance, a system-wide broadcast on a frequency we couldn't block. It wasn't sound. It was a psychic pressure, a gentle, pervasive hum that settled over the human habitats like a shroud. It smoothed the sharp edges of emotion. It made anger feel like a distant memory, defiance like a foolish dream. It was the sonic equivalent of a lobotomy, and it was terrifyingly effective. Riots that had been simmering on the larger hubs simply fizzled out. People forgot why they were angry. The drive to resist was replaced by a placid, hollow acceptance. They would take the neural limiters. They would obey. It was easier. It was peace. The song grated against the echo in my head, a dissonant chord in the symphony of my rage. The constant psychic friction was exhausting, a war being fought in the space behind my eyes. I couldn't stay. To remain in populated space was to risk being pacified. My inner fire dampened to a pilot light. I became a ghost, a phantom darting between the unmonitored debris fields. A myth whispered by those who still had the will to remember defiance. But myths attract pilgrims. They came one by one, then in pairs, then in small squadrons. They were the desperate, the broken, the ones whose hatred burned too hot for the Lumina's song to extinguish. They were pilots who'd lost families, engineers whose life's work had been deemed non-compliant, soldiers from forgotten corporate skirmishes who still knew how to fight. They found me in the shadow of a dead gas giant, their ships appearing on my sensors like offerings. They didn't want a leader. They wanted a weapon. They wanted the thing that had killed an enforcer. Their unofficial commander was a woman named Ilara, a former archivist from the central hub of Meridian. She wasn't a pilot or a soldier. She was a keeper of stories, and she understood that the Lumina's greatest weapon wasn't their ships, but their ability to make us forget our own. "They are erasing us. Kalen," she told me, her face a grim mask on my comm screen. Her ship, the Archive, a repurposed library vessel bristling with salvaged sensor arrays. They don't need to kill us if they can make us forget we were ever alive. That thing in your ship, that echo, it's the only thing loud enough to scream back. We formed a fleet of ghosts, a ragged armada of scavengers, miners, and freighters, all held together by rust, desperation, and the growing legend of the Gnat. We made our base in a place called the Maw, a colossal, hollowed-out asteroid that had once been a pirate stronghold, its interior a chaotic city of gantries and docking bays. It was a place the Lumina patrols avoided, a pocket of anarchy they tolerated as a necessary pressure valve. Now, it was our sanctuary. During this time, the Gnat continued to change. It was no longer just a ship. It was becoming a creature, and I was its nervous system. One cycle, after a minor collision with a piece of debris, I watched as the gash in the hull sealed itself, not with emergency sealant, but with a web of metallic filaments that grew from the wound's edges, pulling it shut like a scar. The control interfaces in the cockpit began to shift, the hard light buttons and switches melding into a smooth, featureless console that responded to my touch. And sometimes, just my thoughts. The echo was weaving itself into the machine and into me. The visions started. They were flashes at first, slivers of someone else's memory bleeding through when I was on the edge of sleep. I saw skies burning with alien suns. I saw fleets of ships, black and angular like the one in the graveyard, tearing through reality itself. I felt an ancient, bottomless betrayal, a rage so profound it made my own hatred for the Lumina feel like a child's tantrum. I was feeling the ghost of the First War, the one that had created the graveyard. And I was beginning to understand that the Echo wasn't a piece of technology. It was a survivor. It was a weapon that had outlived its masters. "We need to show them we're still here," Ilara said, her voice cutting through the low hum of the Maw's command center. "We need to do more than hide. We need to break something they can't ignore." The target she chose was Haven 4, a massive agricultural station, a spinning wheel of green and light that provided food for nearly a third of the human population in this sector. The Lumina hadn't disabled it yet. They were savoring it. They had a small fleet of enforcers stationed there, bathing the habitat in the Song of Concordance, slowly and methodically pacifying its 20,000 inhabitants before they installed the limiters on the station's fleet of transport ships. Breaking their hold on Haven 4 would be a statement. It would be a rescue. It would be suicide. "They'll be waiting for us," I said, tracing the attack vector on the holographic map. "They know someone is out here. They know about me." "Good," Ilara countered, her eyes hard. "Let them look for a monster. We'll give them a swarm." Her plan was simple and insane. Our fleet of 50-odd ships was no match for a squadron of enforcers in open space. But we weren't warriors. We were scavengers. We knew the junk fields, the asteroid clusters, the gravitational anomalies. We would use the system's own garbage as our shield. We would fight like rats in the walls of their perfect house. The battle for Haven 4 began not with a charge, but with a whisper. We drifted in on low power, a cloud of ghosts moving through a dense asteroid field. The Lumina were arrogant. Their sensors were looking for engine signatures, for weapon power-ups. They weren't looking for 100 carefully placed mining charges. Ilara detonated them simultaneously. It was a cascade of destruction, a chain reaction that sent a wave of rock and ice hurtling toward the Lumina patrol. It was a perfect, chaotic smokescreen. In the confusion, we struck. It was a beautiful, desperate dance. Our ships, ugly and functional, swarmed the elegant Lumina vessels. We didn't have their shields or their speed, but we had grit. We used harpoon cables to foul their maneuvering thrusters. We used mining lasers to carve trenches in their crystalline hulls. We fought with the fury of a cornered species. But the song was their true weapon. I could feel it through the hull of the Nate, a psychic wave of calm that sought to smother the fire in my pilots' hearts. I heard it in their voices over the comm's hesitation, confusion, a sudden lack of conviction. "Targets are unclear," one pilot stammered. "Why are we fighting? Stay on them," I roared, but my own voice felt distant. The fury that had become my constant companion was being assailed, diluted by that incessant, placid hum. The echo screamed in my head, a counter-frequency of pure rage, but it was defending, not attacking. We were losing. Pilots were breaking off, their will to fight dissolving into apathy. The Lumina enforcers, recovering from the initial shock, began to methodically pick us apart. Their precise energy beams were finding their marks, and our makeshift fleet was being dismantled. One of our ships, the Forge Runner, went up in a silent flash of light, its pilot having simply stopped evading. "Kalen, they're breaking." Ilara's voice was strained. "The song is too strong." I watched another one of our ships drift aimlessly, its pilot gone placid in his chair. We had the fury, but they had the cure for it. And then I understood. The echo wasn't just a weapon to be fired. It was a voice. Ilara had said it herself. It was the only thing loud enough to scream back. I closed my eyes, shutting out the chaos of the battle. I ignored the tactical display, the warning sirens, the desperate pleas on the comm. I turned inward, toward the cold, burning star of rage in my soul, and I reached for the echo. I didn't ask it. I didn't command it. I joined it for a terrifying, exhilarating moment. The distinction between me and the ancient presence in my ship dissolved. My consciousness expanded, surging through the Nat systems, my will becoming its will. And together, we screamed. It was not a sound. It was a broadcast of pure, unadulterated defiance. It was the memory of G7's silent destruction. It was the howl of 1,000,000,000 dead on a forgotten Earth. It was the ancient, searing betrayal from the echo's own past. It was every injustice, every indignity, every moment of quiet desperation and loud desperation we had ever suffered. It was the song of humanity. And it was a song of war. The wave of psychic energy that erupted from the Nat was visible. A ripple in space, a distortion of light. It slammed into our own fleet first. Over the comms, I heard gasps, then shouts, then roars of renewed fury as the Lumina's psychic pacification shattered. The pilots were awake again, their rage honed to a razor's edge. Then our song hit the Lumina. Their perfect, crystalline ships shuddered. Their movements became erratic. The placid chimes of their comms became a shriek of static. We weren't just jamming their song. We were showing them the meaning of the noise we made. They, who had only known the sterile quiet of the Concordance, were being shown the glorious, terrible chaos of a soul that refused to be silenced. They broke. For the first time in living memory, the Lumina turned and fled. One of the enforcers, its systems overloaded by the psychic onslaught, simply came apart, its crystalline structure dissolving into a glittering cloud of inert dust. We had won. The space around Haven 4 belonged to us. A ragged, triumphant cheer erupted over the comm network. They were cheering me, cheering the Gnat. But as my consciousness receded from the ship's systems and settled back into the confines of my own skull, I felt no triumph. The fire of our shared scream had burned something out of me. The warmth of the victory felt distant, clinical. I looked at the icons of our remaining ships, saw them celebrating, and I felt a profound sense of detachment, as if I were watching a species I no longer belonged to. Alara's voice came over my private channel, quiet and laced with a new kind of fear. "Kalen, we did it." I looked out at the stars, at the glittering dust of the dead enforcer. The echo was quiet again, a coiled serpent inside me. We had won the battle, but to do so, I had to become more of what it wanted me to be. Colder, louder, less human. "No," I replied, my own voice sounding alien in my ears. It did. And in the silence that followed, I knew this was only the beginning of a war for our survival. But I was beginning to fear that by the time it was over, there would be nothing human left to save. The liberation of Haven 4 was a spark in a tinderbox. What started as a myth whispered in the dark corners of the rust became a verified fact. A rallying cry broadcast on unsecured channels for all to hear. We hadn't just won a battle, we had proven that gods could bleed. The response was a flood. Ships, hundreds of them, began pouring into the maw. They were a motley collection of every human vessel imaginable, hulking ore haulers with hulls scarred by asteroid impacts, nimble courier ships stripped down for speed, even entire family habitats that had disengaged their moorings and ignited their cold thrust engines for the first time in generations. They came with hope in their eyes and a new, unfamiliar word on their lips: revolution. Our ghost fleet of 50 became an armada of 500 overnight, and with that growth came a new, crushing weight of expectation that settled squarely on my shoulders. I was no longer Kalen, the pilot. I was the Void Breaker, the Enforcer's Bane, the living embodiment of our nascent rebellion. They didn't see the man, they saw the weapon, and they were desperate to point me at the enemy. Alara, ever the historian, saw the danger. "They're turning you into a symbol," she told me one cycle as we stood on the observation deck of the archive, watching the chaotic ballet of ships docking in the maw. "Symbols are powerful, Kalen, but they're also cages. People don't follow a man, they follow an idea, and if the man falters, the idea dies." She was right. The echo was a constant presence now, a low hum of predatory satisfaction that colored my every thought. It was getting harder to distinguish my own anger from its ancient, insatiable hunger. The lines were blurring. I spent most of my time in the Gnat, the only place that felt real anymore. The ship had continued its transformation. The cockpit was now a seamless sphere of the same obsidian material as the derelict in the graveyard. When I sat in the pilot's chair, the ship's skin would ripple and flow, forming a cocoon around me, hard light displays blooming into existence wherever my gaze fell. We were merging, becoming a single biomechanical entity driven by a shared, burning purpose. The victories that followed Haven 4 were swift and brutal. We became the fire we'd been born from, tearing through the Lumina's control systems. We would appear out of nowhere, a swarm of angry, desperate ships led by a monster that could kill with a thought. My scream, as the pilots had taken to calling it, became our ultimate weapon. With the echo's power, I could shatter the Song of Concordance, turning the Lumina's greatest strength into a crippling vulnerability. Their fleets, so used to the psychic harmony that coordinated their every move, fell into disarray when that harmony was broken. They were perfect cogs in a perfect machine, but when the machine stalled, the cogs were just useless pieces of metal. We liberated outpost after outpost, habitat after habitat. Each victory brought more followers, more ships, more resources. The Maw grew from a pirate den into a sprawling, chaotic capital of the new free human conglomerate, a grandiose name for what was essentially an organized mob. I was their reluctant figurehead. Alara was their strategic mind, and Ren, the old scrapper I'd saved, became the grizzled heart of our council, a constant, grounding reminder of who we were fighting for. But with every world we freed, I felt a piece of myself die. The Echo demanded efficiency. It showed me the fastest routes to victory, the most effective ways to break the enemy. It saw compassion as a tactical flaw, mercy as a waste of energy. When we took the mining colony on Cygnus X1, a group of Lumina administrators surrendered. They were unarmed, their light forms dim and flickering with fear. My pilots wanted to take them prisoner. The Echo showed me a different path. It showed me a future probability where these prisoners became a rallying point for a kindred counterattack, a symbol of Lumina martyrdom. It showed me their deaths as a cold, logical necessity. I gave the order. We vented them into space. I watched their light fade into the void, and I felt nothing. No remorse, no satisfaction, just the quiet hum of a problem solved. Ren confronted me afterward, his face a mask of disbelief and horror. They were surrendering. Kalen. We're supposed to be better than them. Better is a luxury we can't afford, I replied, the words feeling like they were spoken by someone else. We need to win, at any cost. He looked at me then, truly looked at me, and I saw the moment he stopped seeing the man he knew and started seeing the monster they whispered about. He didn't say another word. He just walked away. And in his silence, I felt the first real casualty of our war. The Lumina, for their part, were adapting. They couldn't counter my scream, so they changed their tactics. They began to withdraw, ceding the outer belt, the rust, to us. They consolidated their forces, pulling back to the inner systems, the heart of the crucible where the other, more powerful kindred species resided. They were building a wall, not of ships, but of politics. They went to the Vex, a silicon-based species of crystalline builders and artisans. They went to the Cathar, a proud, warrior race of insectoids. They went to all the elder species of the kindred, and they painted us not as rebels, but as a plague, a violent, chaotic, destabilizing force that threatened the delicate balance of the entire crucible. They used my actions against me, the execution of the prisoners, the scorched earth tactics the Echo favored, the sheer, uncompromising violence of our rebellion. It was all perfect propaganda. We were no longer fighting for freedom in the eyes of the galaxy. We were fighting for destruction. Ilara brought the reports to my chamber aboard the Nat. They're turning the entire system against us, she said, her voice tight with anxiety. The Cathar have mobilized their fleet on the border of the Elysian fields. The Vex are reinforcing their orbital platforms around Sol Anku. They're not just defending, they're preparing for an extermination. Let them come, I said, my gaze fixed on the star chart, which now felt less like a map and more like a menu. We've beaten the Lumina. We'll beat them, too. How? She demanded, stepping in front of the chart, forcing me to look at her. We're outmatched, Kalen. We're a rebellion, not an empire. We win by being smarter, by being faster. We can't win a war of attrition against the combined might of the kindred. We have the Echo, I said simply. The Echo is not an army. It's you, and I don't know who you are anymore. She confessed, her voice cracking. The man who saved Haven 4 wouldn't have executed prisoners. He wouldn't look at a map of 1 billion souls and see a checklist. Her words were a physical blow, a momentary crack in the cold certainty that the Echo provided. For a heartbeat, I felt a flicker of the old Kalen, the grieving, angry scavenger from G7. I saw the horror of my own actions reflected in her eyes. But the Echo was faster. It soothed the doubt, smoothed over the guilt, and reinforced the cold, hard logic of survival. Sentiment is a flaw. Attachment is a vulnerability. Erase it. I'm doing what needs to be done, I said, my voice flat, devoid of the emotion I knew she was looking for. The disappointment on her face was a wound, but it was a wound I could no longer feel. Our confrontation was interrupted by a system-wide alert, a transmission, overriding all channels, broadcast from the heart of the system, from the throne world of the Lumina itself. It was an invitation. The Kindred Council was convening an emergency session. They were offering us a chance to plead our case, to explain our actions before the assembled powers of the Crucible. It was a trial, and we were the accused. It's a trap, I said instantly. Of course, it's a trap. Ilara agreed, but it's also an opportunity, a chance to speak to them, to show them we're not the monsters the Lumina claim we are. We have to go. The Echo screamed in my mind. Deception, ambush, annihilation. It showed me a dozen scenarios, all ending with our fleet being cornered and destroyed. No, I said, turning back to the map. We're not walking into the lion's den. Our advantage is our mobility. Our strength is in the chaos we create. We go on the offensive. We hit the Cathar fleet before they're fully mobilized. You're talking about a preemptive strike against a neutral power. Ilara was aghast. That will prove the Lumina right. We'll lose everything we've fought for. We've fought for the right to exist. I countered, my voice rising. The Echo's power bleeding into my words, making the very air in the room vibrate. And existence is not granted by councils and treaties. It's taken, it's held, it's defended with blood and fire. We stood there, locked in a battle of wills that was a microcosm of the war itself. Her, fighting for the soul of our rebellion, for the idea that we could be better. Me, fighting for the cold, hard reality of survival, driven by a power that saw souls as little more than fuel. The debate raged for a full cycle. The council was divided. Ren, his face etched with a deep sadness, sided with Ilara, the younger, more aggressive commanders, high on our recent victories, sided with me. The free human conglomerate was on the verge of tearing itself apart. The decision was made for us. A scout ship, one of Ilara's, returned from a deep-range patrol near the Veil, the impassable border of our prison system. It brought back sensor readings that made no sense. The Veil, for millennia, a stable, shimmering wall of energy, was fluctuating. Something on the outside was pushing against it, something vast. The ship's logs contained a fragmented audio recording, A burst of static captured across the dimensional barrier. It was noise, mostly. But when the technicians filtered it, they found a pattern. A single, repeating word, spoken in a language that felt impossibly ancient, yet chillingly familiar. Remember, the word cut through the echo's hum like a blade. For a moment, the ancient entity in my ship went completely silent, a stillness that was more terrifying than its usual predatory whispers. In that silence, a memory that was not my own flooded my mind. A vision of a galaxy on fire, of a war fought against an enemy that consumed stars, an enemy that came from the silent, endless dark between galaxies, an enemy that had been forgotten. The Echo wasn't just a survivor. It was a sentinel, a weapon left behind to stand guard against a threat so profound the creators of the Crucible had imprisoned a star system just to hide it. We were not the inmates. We were the guardians. And we had just, in our ignorant, furious rebellion, tripped the alarm. The Lumina's invitation was no longer a trap. It was a desperate plea. They weren't trying to exterminate us. They were trying to silence us, because the noise of our war, the scream of the Echo, was broadcasting our position to the things that waited in the dark. The council fell silent, the weight of this new revelation crushing our petty squabbles into insignificance. Our war for freedom was a child's game compared to the horror that was stirring outside our cage. I looked at Ilara, at Ren, at the faces of my commanders, and for the first time since the Echo awoke, I felt a tremor of pure, unadulterated fear. "We have to go to the council," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "We have to tell them what's coming." And as I spoke, the Echo stirred again, its voice no longer just hungry, but filled with a new, terrible purpose. "They are coming. We must be ready. We must become." It was no longer just about winning a war. It was about becoming a weapon worthy of the one that was coming to claim us. The journey to the Kindred Council felt like a funeral procession. Our fleet, 100 of our best and fastest ships, moved in a tight, disciplined formation that belied the turmoil churning within every cockpit. The usual bravado and defiant chatter on the comms had been replaced by a tense, somber silence. We were no longer rebels on a righteous crusade. We were messengers bearing an apocalypse, traveling to face the very judges who had, hours ago, been our sworn enemies. The Gnat led the formation, a black spearhead against the crimson glow of Sol Anku. Inside my obsidian cocoon, the Echo was a storm. The revelation of the external threat had reawaked something in it, a sense of ancient duty that warred with its primal hunger. It showed me fragmented visions, not of conquest, but of defense. It showed me fleets of black, angular ships like its own, holding a line against a tide of indescribable cosmic horrors, things that were not made of matter, but of absence, of unraveling reality. It showed me a galaxy dying, not in fire, but in a spreading, silent cold. It was showing me its purpose, and that purpose was terrifyingly absolute to hold the line. At any cost, all sentiment, all mercy, all individuality was a weakness in the face of such an enemy. To fight the void, you had to become the void. As we neared the inner system, the sheer scale of the Kindred's power became suffocatingly clear. We passed through the Elysian Fields, home of the Cathar, a breathtaking vista of orbital habitats spun from living coral and swarming with the elegant, chitinous warships of the insectoid race. They shadowed us, their fleet a silent, glittering cloud of judgment. We flew past the Vex's star forges, colossal structures that siphon plasma directly from Sol Anku, their crystalline surfaces bristling with energy cannons that could crack a moon. For the first time, the true scope of our prison became apparent. We had been fighting a war in the front yard, while Titans slumbered in the house. The council convened on Lumina Prime, a perfect sphere of spun light and solidified energy that served as the capital of our self-appointed shepherds. To dock there felt like a profound violation, a surrender. My pilots were on edge, their hands hovering over weapons controls, every fiber of their being screaming that this was a mistake. I had to broadcast a fleet-wide edict, laced with the Echo's authority, just to keep them in line. Trust. Obey. The threat is not here. Elara, Ren, and I were escorted from the docking bay by Lumina Sentinels, beings of pure, silent light, whose placid forms now seemed less like grace and more like a mask for incredible power. The council chamber was a vast amphitheater, designed to intimidate. Representatives from every major kindred species sat in tiered platforms, looking down on us. There were the Cathar, their multifaceted eyes clicking with cold assessment. The Vex, whose crystalline forms shimmered with internal calculations. And a dozen other species I had only ever seen in Dataphile's gaseous philosophers, silicon-based geologists, ancient, silent beings who had likely watched stars be born. At the center, on a raised dais, sat the Lumina Triumvirate, their light so bright it was painful to look at. We were small, soft, and painfully organic in this hall of gods. I was the one who had to speak. The Echo gave me the words, not in our language, but in the pure, conceptual tongue it had taught me, a language of intent that every being in the chamber understood. I didn't speak of freedom or rebellion. I spoke of the veil, of the fluctuations. I spoke of the signal we had intercepted, the single, repeating word that had silenced my inner demon. I projected the memory the Echo had shown me, the vision of the galaxy-consuming horror, the silent, cold enemy from the outer dark. I finished, and a silence deeper than space filled the chamber. The beings before me were ancient, powerful, and wise. They were also complacent. They had been safe in their crucible for so long. They had forgotten why the walls were built. The first to speak was a Cathar warlord, his voice a series of sharp, percussive clicks translated by our PAs. A convenient vision, a tale spun by a violent primitive to excuse his atrocities. You have broken the concordance. Human, you have sown chaos. Now you bring us nightmares to justify your war. The Vex representative, a towering crystal entity, resonated in agreement. The logic is flawed. The veil has been stable for 10 millennia. The probability of an external threat of this magnitude emerging concurrently with your species' violent uprising is statistically insignificant. It is a deception. They didn't believe me. To them, we were the problem. Our chaotic, emotional, ambitious nature was the only real threat they had known for eons. They saw my warning not as a revelation, but as the desperate gambit of a cornered animal. The Lumina, who must have known the truth, remained silent, their light unwavering. They had built this cage and thrown away the key, and they were willing to let us all die in it rather than admit their failure. The Echo raged in my mind. Fools! They are blind. They will be the architects of their own extinction. We must force them to see." Its voice was no longer a whisper. It was a command. It urged me to unleash my scream, to shatter their arrogant composure, to show them a power that would make them believe. It wanted me to become the monster they thought I was, to prove my point through sheer, terrifying force. But as I looked up at those ancient, unyielding faces, I saw Ilara looking at me, her expression not one of fear, but of pleading. She was begging me not to prove them right, not to become the mindless weapon she feared I already was. And then I saw Ren, his hand resting on the hilt of a ceremonial blade he wore, a relic from old Earth. He wasn't looking at the council. He was looking at me. And his eyes held no hope, only a grim, weary resolve. He was there to stop me, if he had to. In that moment, a schism occurred within me. For the first time, I pushed back against the echo. I refused its command. It was a monumental effort, like trying to hold back a supernova with my bare hands. The conflict was so violent, it felt physical. The air around me crackled with energy, and the luminous sentinels shifted, sensing the raw power I was suppressing. "There is another way to prove it." Ilara's voice cut through the tension, startling the council. She stepped forward, holding a data slate. The archives on my ship, the very histories the Lumina sought to pacify, contain fragmented records, mentions of a Star Eater, a silent cold. They are dismissed as mythology, as fables to frighten young spawn, but they correlate with the energy signature of the derelict Kalen found, the one that contains the echo. She projected the data onto the chamber's main viewer. Ancient texts, faded star charts, mythic poems from a dozen different cultures, all telling the same story of a great enemy, a war that broke the galaxy, and the creation of a great sanctuary. The Crucible. The proof is there. She finished, her voice ringing with the conviction of a historian who had just found her Rosetta Stone. "You have just forgotten how to read it." Her words hung in the air, a challenge to their millennia of comfortable dogma. It might have worked. It might have planted a seed of doubt, but we never got the chance to find out. An alarm, a piercing, system-wide shriek I had never heard before, cut through the chamber. On the main view screen, the image of the council was replaced by a live feed from an observatory on the edge of the system. The veil, it was no longer shimmering. It was boiling. The energy field was tearing open, and from the tear, something was emerging. It wasn't a ship. It was a hole in the universe, a sphere of absolute, perfect blackness that did not reflect or block light, but consumed it. It moved with a slow, deliberate grace. And as it passed by a distant moon, the moon didn't explode. It simply ceased to be, erased. And from that sphere of nothingness, a transmission bloomed across all frequencies. Not a voice, not a signal, just a wave of pure, psychic intent. A concept that every living mind in the Crucible understood simultaneously. Hunger. The council chamber erupted into chaos. The ancient beings, so composed moments before, were now a maelstrom of panic. Their complacency had been shattered by a single, irrefutable truth. The nightmares were real. The monster was at the door. Amid the pandemonium, the Lumina triumvirate finally moved. They floated down from their dais, their light coalescing around me. You were right. The lead Lumina projected, its voice a chime of pure, cold dread. The echo was placed as a final warning, a weapon of last resort. We prayed it would never awaken. Its awakening was meant to be the signal to unite us. The Cathar warlord turned its multifaceted eyes on me, all arrogance gone, replaced by the grim focus of a soldier. Your weapon, the scream. Can it fight? That before I could answer, the echo spoke in my mind, its voice now one of cold, absolute certainty, the voice of a sentinel assuming its post. It is not a weapon to fight them. It is a key. It was meant to awaken the Crucible's true defenses. It was meant to turn the prison into a fortress. My mind reeled. The systems in the gnat, the gravity weapon, the impossible engines, the psychic scream, they weren't just for combat. They were part of a larger mechanism. The graveyard. I breathed, the realization hitting me with the force of a physical blow. The ships in the graveyard. The lumina pulsed in affirmation. They are not derelicts. They are dormant. They are the Aegis fleet, and only the echo can wake them. Suddenly, our petty rebellion, our war for freedom, seemed like a distant, childish dream. The universe had handed us our true purpose. We were not rebels. We were not conquerors. We were the spark that had to relight the galaxy's last defense against the all-consuming dark. We have to get back to our ships, I said, my voice cutting through the panic. We have to go to the graveyard. But as we turned to leave, the sphere of nothingness outside the veil did something new. It pulsed, and a wave of energy, an anti-song, washed over the system. It was not a song of peace like the Luminas. It was a song of entropy, of unraveling. On Lumina Prime, the lights flickered. The Vex representative cried out as cracks began to form in its crystalline body. The song was targeting complex systems, breaking down the bonds of energy and matter. It was a weapon aimed at the very heart of civilization, and in my head, I felt it touch the echo, but it didn't harm it. Instead, the echo seemed to resonate with it, to feed on it. The entity in my ship was not a creation of the Crucible's builders. It was a weapon they had found, a piece of something else, something that understood this new enemy. As the song of entropy intensified, I felt a new power surge through me from the echo, a terrible, exhilarating clarity. The path forward was clear. The Aegis fleet had to be awakened. The kindred, with their crumbling technology and their shattered composure, could not be relied upon. The responsibility fell to us, to humanity, the species that had been forged in chaos, the only ones who knew how to thrive when the rules broke down. The echo showed me the final, terrible truth. To awaken the fleet, it needed a focus, a mind strong enough to channel its full, untethered power, a pilot who could become the nexus for 1,000 dormant warships. It showed me what I had to become. No longer a man, no longer a symbol, but a conduit, a living catalyst. The process would burn away the last vestiges of Kalen, the scavenger. It would leave only the Voidbreaker, a being of pure will and purpose, a human soul reforged into the master key for an ancient, apocalyptic war machine. I looked at Ilara, at her face pale with terror and hope. I looked at Ren, who had been ready to kill me to save my soul. I had a choice. I could guide them, lead them as a man. Or I could sacrifice that man to become the weapon they desperately needed. And as the station groaned around us, the light of Lumina Prime dying, I knew there was no choice at all. Get to the archive, I told Ilara, my voice already sounding distant. Gather all the historical data you can on the Aegis. We're going to need a blueprint. What are you going to do? She asked, her voice trembling. I turned to face the chaos, my mind already reaching out, connecting with the gnat, with the cold, waiting heart of the echo. I'm going to turn on the lights. The escape from Lumina Prime was a descent into chaos. The station, a being of pure energy, was dying. The Star Eater's song of entropy was unmaking it from the inside out. Corridors of light dissolved into swirling vortexes of static, and the perfect geometry of the city warped and buckled. The Lumina Sentinels, their forms flickering and unstable, guided us through the collapsing reality, their placid chimes now tinged with a desperate urgency. The Kindred Council, stripped of their power and decorum, were just refugees now, scrambling for their ships alongside us. The rigid caste system of the Crucible had been erased in a single, terrifying moment. We were all just inmates, and the prison walls were coming down. Back on the Gnat, the ship was alive with a power that threatened to tear it apart. The echo, no longer a whisper or a scream, was a roaring celestial choir in my mind. It was preparing me, reforging my consciousness for the task ahead. The process was an agony of transcendence. Memories of my life, the acrid smell of recycled air on G7, the rough texture of Ren's hand clapping my shoulder, the sorrow in Elara's eyes were being cataloged, analyzed, and then filed away, stripped of their emotional weight. They were becoming data, no longer experiences. I was being hollowed out, my humanity becoming the vessel for something vast and terrible. Focus, unify, become. The commands were no longer suggestions. They were the new laws of my physics. I could feel my connection to the ship deepening until there was no separation. My thoughts were the ship's navigation. My will was its weapons. My soul was its reactor. Our fleet, a ragged coalition of human rebels, and the surviving ships of the Kindred Council, fled toward the graveyard. Behind us, Lumina Prime finally died. It didn't explode. It simply imploded, folding in on itself until it was a pinpoint of light that then vanished, leaving a scar of absolute blackness in the void. The Lumina, as a distinct species, were gone. Their knowledge, their power, their arrogance erased. We were on our own. The Aegis fleet. Elara's voice crackled over the comm, pulling me from my painful metamorphosis. The data is fragmented, but it's clear. The ships aren't just dormant, they're phase-locked. They exist in a state between realities. The echo isn't a key, it's an anchor. It's designed to pull them back into our dimension. And Kalen is the winch, Ren's grim voice added. He understood. They both did. They were watching me die and be reborn. And there was nothing they could do but prepare for what came next. As we entered the graveyard, the echo's power surged. It recognized its purpose, its home. The field of dead ships was no longer a tomb. It was a sleeping army. The echo guided me to the heart of the field, to the primordial, obsidian ship where my journey had begun, the Nexus, the command throne. You must interface. The wound in the Nexus ship's side gaped open like an invitation. I guided the gnat inside, the smaller ship feeling like a child returning to the womb. At the vessel's core, the crystalline lattice, the source of the echo, pulsed with a blinding light. I left the cockpit, my body moving with a fluid grace that was no longer entirely my own. I floated toward the crystal, and as I reached out my hand, The transformation completed. The moment my fingers touched the lattice, a wave of energy erupted, not just through me, but through the entire graveyard, on the bridge of the archive. Ilara and Ren watched in awe as, one by one, the dead ships began to stir. Lights flickered to life across hulls that had been dark for 10,000 years. Angular, aggressive weapon emplacements slid from hidden ports. Engines, powered by principles of physics we couldn't comprehend, began to glow with a cold, blue fire. The Aegis fleet was waking up. My consciousness was no longer confined to my body or the gnat. It was everywhere. I was the fleet. I felt the thrum of 1,000 reactors, saw through 10,000 sensor arrays, commanded 1,000,000 weapon systems. The last vestiges of Kalen, the man, his grief, his anger, his fear were burned away in the supernova of that connection, consumed as fuel. What remained was the Voidbreaker, a being of pure, focused will, a human soul hammered into the shape of a god of war. I could feel the Star Eater approaching. It was a cancer in the fabric of space. Its song of entropy, a dissonant hum that sought to unmake everything. But now, I had a voice to answer it. I turned my new body, my fleet of ancient, impossible warships, and I faced the encroaching darkness, and I sang. It was not the scream of rage I had used against the Lumina. It was a song of order, of structure, of existence itself. It was the anthem of a reality that refused to be erased. My song, the song of the Aegis, pushed back against the entropy, creating a bulwark of stable space-time around our fleet. The battle that followed was not one of explosions and kinetic impacts. It was a war of fundamental principles, a conflict fought on the level of reality itself. The Star Eater's sphere of nothingness would erase a section of space, and I would command my ships to fire lances of pure causality, weaving the whole shut with the threads of time and physics. Its song would try to unravel my ships, and I would reinforce their metaphysical structure with a harmonic of pure, unyielding will. The human and kindred fleets could do nothing but watch from a safe distance as two godlike entities battled for the fate of their universe. They were no longer participants. They were the prize. Inside the nexus of my consciousness, I felt the Star Eater's focus turn to me. It recognized me not as a machine, but as the core of the resistance. It sent a probe of pure entropy into my mind, seeking to unravel the consciousness that held the Aegis together. It showed me a universe of perfect silence, of ultimate peace, where all struggle and pain had ceased because all existence had ceased. It offered me oblivion as a release. For a moment, it was tempting. The weight of 1,000 ships, of an entire reality, was a burden beyond comprehension. But in the hollowed-out core of my being, in the archive where the man named Kalen used to live, a single piece of data flared to life. Not a memory, but a fact. The laughter of a child. It was the last echo of the humanity I had sacrificed, and it was the one thing the Star Eater's logic of nothingness could not compute. It was an anomaly of pure, irrational hope. I seized on it. I used that single, illogical data point as a seed, and I weaponized it. I broadcast it back at the Star Eater. I showed it the glorious, terrible, beautiful chaos of life. I showed it love and hatred, creation and destruction, joy and sorrow. I showed it every contradiction that made existence meaningful. I showed it humanity, the entity, a being of pure, sterile logic, recoiled, It could not process the paradox of a universe that thrived on imperfection. My song swelled, reinforced by this new, chaotic power. I commanded the Aegis fleet to focus its fire, not on the sphere of nothingness, but on the space around it, warping reality, tying it into a knot from which it could not escape. I was not trying to destroy it. I was trying to contain it, to build a prison around the prison breaker. The effort was monumental. I could feel my own consciousness, the very will that held the fleet together, beginning to fracture under the strain. I was a finite being wielding an infinite power, and the feedback was erasing me. I sent a final, silent message to the Allied fleet. A single, clear directive: leave. Now. Alara's voice, a ghost from a life I barely remembered, came back, filled with anguish. "We're not leaving you. Kalen is already gone." I replied, the thought a detached, clinical observation. "The void breaker is failing. The prison will not hold forever. Go. Build something new. And remember," I put the last of my will into a final, crushing blow. Space-time itself folded around the Star Eater. I created a pocket dimension, a blister on the skin of reality, and I pushed the entity inside. Then, I sealed it. The backlash was absolute. The Nexus crystal shattered. The Aegis fleet, its anchor gone, began to flicker, its connection to our reality severed. The ships did not explode. They simply faded, becoming ghosts once more, returning to their phase-locked slumber in the graveyard. My consciousness, untethered, shattered into 1,000,000,000 points of light. My last sensation was not of pain, or fear, or victory. It was of silence, a quiet, final peace. On the bridge of the archive, Alara watched the last of the Aegis fleet fade away. The Star Eater was gone. The graveyard was once again silent and still. Kalen was gone. Ren placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. He did it. The boy actually did it. Alara wiped a tear from her eye, looking at the assembled fleet of survivors, human and kindred, floating together in the aftermath. The crucible was no more. The veil had been shattered. The galaxy was open to them, vast and unknown. Kalen had not just saved them, he had freed them. "He told us to remember," she said, her voice soft but firm. She turned to the comms panel, her historian's purpose now clearer than ever. "All right, everyone," she broadcast to the fleet, her voice ringing with a newfound strength. "Let's give him a future worth remembering." They turned their ships away from the dying red giant, away from the graveyard of their old lives, and set a course for a new star, carrying with them the memory of the angry scavenger who had become a god, who had sacrificed his humanity to remind them of their own. And in the silent, empty cockpit of the Gnat, drifting lifelessly in the graveyard, a single hard light display flickered on, showing one word against the static: "Remember." The echo was gone, but the ghost in the machine remained.